If you want to stay up to date with all current hip-hop events and releases, make sure to subscribe and become part of this community. Oh, and also, go cop that fresh merch and listen to my new songs in the description. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Kendrick Lamar's 5th studio album that was very much anticipated, dropped over 2 months ago now, on Friday the 13th in May. And ever since then, it's gotten mixed reviews. I like the album quite a bit. We've seen some people not like the album, but it's just been like, he's on tour now. I also got tickets. If you do have tickets, let me know in the comments. But it kind of seemed like Kendrick is just dropping these albums every few years, letting his fans wait quite some time. I mean, there were 5 years in between Damn and Mr. Morale, so it was always a question. We didn't even discuss the possibility of Kendrick dropping anytime soon. But his producer, his go-to producer, Sounwave, who's also worked on 13 of the 16 songs on Mr. Morale, has recently opened up a lot in 2 interviews, to be specific. One of them was on Complex, so Complex did an interview with him, and the other one was a GQ interview, and he said quite some interesting stuff that I want to get into. So let's jump straight into this. So the main thing that I want to get at is Sounwave saying that they moved straight onto the next project, the next Kendrick Lamar project. And he said this by saying, we always start immediately after. Like, we're starting on the next one now. That's never going to change. All the way from the Kendrick Lamar EP, so all the way back in the day when they started out. The next day we start on section 80. It's just the ideas never stop. That's one of the main reasons I go on tour with them, is to create the next album. So this also kind of gives us a little sneak peek into what Kendrick is doing right now, because he is on tour right now. He's touring for, Mr. Morale, and it kind of seems like he's working on the new album on tour as well, which is very, very exciting. He goes on to say, we can't skip a beat. We just have to keep going. There's no breaks. There's no such thing as a vacation when you're doing what you love. Everything you do is what you love to do, so you're excited. He then also goes a little bit deeper into the creation of Mr. Morale, calling it one of the toughest creative processes he's gone through, and also saying how it affected Kendrick. He said, for Kendrick, I don't know. I know he went through a lot too. If you want to say this, we could do 3 albums of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. There would be similar content, but sonically it would be completely different, just because our emotions constantly keep changing. Things keep happening in the world which changes this. Then all of a sudden you don't feel that way anymore. So it's constantly changing to the point where you look up and like, oh shoot, this is a completely different album. I just found this interesting because it kind of gives us a little bit more a glimpse into what the creation of Mr. Morale was like. It seems a little bit messy. It seems like their, state of mind was completely all over the place. They just went from, this emotion to this emotion, trying to capture all that, and there's definitely something that we can kind of like, capture on the actual album as well. He goes on to, kind of detail a couple of the songs, how they were made. I find the one about Cry Together very, very interesting. So if you have the time, read through those 2 interviews. Very, very valuable resource if you want to learn more about this album. But let's talk about this new album. Let's talk about them, working on a new album. I got to give a disclaimer right away. Him saying that they're working on the new album doesn't mean that a new album is coming very soon. As we learned, for example, Father Time, the song with Sampha on the new record, which is also one of my favorites. It's an amazing, song on there. But that was recorded, in the beginning of 2019. That's what, Sounwave said. And so the beginning of 2019 was quite some time ago, over 3 years ago. So the song came out 3.5 years after it was done. So that's just to put it into perspective of how long-term Kendrick Lamar is like recording music and putting out music. It's going to take a couple of more years till we're actually going to be able to hear this new album that they're now working on. I just think it's, really interesting to think about that Kendrick right now is working on new music that we're going to be able to listen to in a couple of years. And also looking at the comments, I've said this earlier, but of Sounwave talking about how there could have been 3 different Mr. Morale albums, because the stuff that Kendrick was going through emotionally and in his life didn't change, but they could have packaged it in a whole different way, in 3 different ways. He said it like that. It's not a specific number, but just generally speaking. So it's like, I think they could drop a lot more music, but they're very selective with what they put out and what they want the public to hear. And that's also why maybe Mr. Morale was a sound that didn't really catch on to the mainstream. We don't see a single off of Mr. Morale that really blew up like that, or that became some viral song like Humble did for Damn. We saw N95 become pretty big, but not like the level of like a internationally big, single. And this is a paradox that I talked about in the most recent episode of my podcast as well, how like nowadays through this like mass consumption of music and this really frequently dropping albums, we are really detached from actually great music and timeless music. But I think, time will prove that Mr. Morale was actually a really great record, and there was something that was timeless at the time it dropped. And so I'm not worried about Kendrick not being able to drop another classic album. I think the next one will be just as great and just as timeless. It will likely be even more detached from what's currently popping, and that's not a bad thing. I would love for Kendrick to be this dude in hip-hop that just comes around every couple of years and just drops an album we can all agree is timeless and great without being too worried about what's going on in hip-hop right now. So Sounwave talking about a new album being in the works it's great news. It means that Kendrick is not retired. That is the number one thing I got out of this, but it also doesn't mean that we'll actually get the new album within the next couple of months or even within the next couple of years. Likely, as I said, within the next 2 to 3 years. I think the reason why there was such a big break in between Damn and Mr. Morale was also COVID. When we talk about him recording Father Time in early 2019, that's what he said in the interview when they went to London and met, linked up with Sampha. If he recorded it at the beginning of 2019, then that was only, 1.5 years or 1.5 years after Damn dropped. So that was not even that long after that. And likely, if they actually continued at this pace, they would have dropped the album in like 2020, 3 years later, which is by far more normalized than 5 years, which it was now. And so maybe COVID was the main factor that also delayed this album so much, because they weren't able to go to the studio and stuff like that. Maybe Kendrick went through some other stuff in the meantime during COVID. We saw him on the streets, also protesting Black Lives Matter in the same summer as COVID hit. So all that stuff happened. So maybe that was another driving factor in why this was delayed so much. But we are positive that there will be another Kendrick Lamar album confirmed by Sounwave, which is pretty dope. And as I said, I recommend you go check out those two interviews with GQ and Complex, because those were really great, and I think that that's a great resource if you're just interested also in the lore like behind Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. But yeah, that's it for me. Kendrick Lamar, new album confirmed. They're working on it right now, but likely not within the next couple of years. Let me know what you think about this. Are you excited for this? When do you think this is coming out? What are your thoughts on Mr. Morale's now 2.5 months after it dropped? Does it still hold up to the same importance that it was, that it did back when it dropped? So all your thoughts and theories on this, please let me know in the comments down below. If you watched this video to the end and liked it, and you want to stay up to date with all current hip-hop events and releases, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, hit that like button, and go follow my social media, and most importantly, join my Discord in the description. Until the next one, you'll have an incredible day, and y'all take care.